addicted, they go back and they look at their records and they say, you wrote this prescription and you didn't put in your note that you talked with this person. What could happen to that practitioner?
That's a good question. So we actually haven't included any penalties in regards to this. When we originally drafted this, we thought it would go into the licensure regulations, and it ended up in the Uniform Drug Code, which was unexpected, but it's also an appropriate place when we're dealing with opiates and their and how they're sent back out into the community. But at this point, there wouldn't be a penalty for that provider.
So they would not have to face a possible lawsuit because they didn't have this in their record?
Well, outside of by not abiding by the statute, I'm certain that a patient could bring a lawsuit. And if you would like to entertain stricter penalties, I'm certain that's something that I would be happy to consider. But at this point, we don't have penalties as part of this statute.
Well, I'm not sure that penalties are necessary. I don't think that's what I'm asking is that does this open up a window for a practitioner who inadvertently just doesn't add that in their medical record, coming back and saying, you didn't tell these people this, and therefore there's a, again, I like your bill. I also am aware that sometimes things don't get put in medical records that you'd like to have in medical records, and you generally find it out when you get a request for the records and you go back and say, doggone it, I never mentioned that in it, or I could have mentioned that, or something of the sort, and those are the sort of things that get tripped up. And so they could say, you were supposed to, you don't have in here that you told the patient that they could be addicted to this drug. And you did not put in there what the options were for it. Do you understand where I'm coming from on that one?
Absolutely, Senator Hilkeman. And unfortunately, the only way for us to know that this discussion occurred is to make sure that it's included in the medical record. If there is no notation in the medical record, it's hard for us to know that, even inadvertently, that a discussion was held with the patient about the dangers of opioids.
Well, of course, you know, in law, if it isn't in the record, it didn't happen. And so a doctor can say, oh yeah, I do that all the time, or I've done that. And if you don't have it in the record, it did not happen. And I'm just concerned about a practitioner doing, and with the electronic medical records that they have today, if you don't click the right icon and say that you sent that, what does that do to that practitioner? I just think that we're opening up a little window here for some liability to the doctors that I'm not sure the doctors would really appreciate having.
Time, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hilkeman and Senator Howard. Senator Christ, you're recognized.
First, I'm sorry about my lack of prowess with the alphabet this morning, but you can either take it as not knowing the alphabet or not being politically correct. It's up to you. But I wanted to comment for 1 second on Senator Hilkeman's caution. I did ask a resident pharmacist about what that might mean, and and I think we need to pursue that between general and select. I know many of you who, if you're obtaining medications the way most of us do, there is a litany of cautions and warnings on the package that you pick up from your local pharmacy that give you that same caution. And I think we should look into it. Senator Howard, I'm sure, will look into it between now and then. And it is both the hazard and the strength of the present day medical data system in terms of, indeed, not hitting the right icon. But I do think that that can be worked out now between general and select and coverage. It's amazing to me that there are so many cautions and warnings and suggestions on the information that we get with the prescriptions from the actual pharmacy. potentially this is something that the doctors, in terms of the medical records, would have to include on the pharmacy or on the prescription that's sent out. I would like to mention just one other thing because I ran out of time on my last time on the mic, and this will be the last time I speak on general file about this one. This is truly, and I don't want to get blethering about this thing or overbearing or even emotional, but this is truly an example of 3 different senators in 3 different walks of life with 3 very different experiences coming together. And it's also an example of how a omnibus bill, if you will, or a Christmas tree bill can be fashioned and can be understood. And I want to compliment Chair Epke and the legal counsels and the Judiciary Committee for bringing it together in the way that it has come together. That's all I have. Thanks for listening, colleagues.
Thank you, Senator Christ. Seeing no others in the queue, Senator Epke, you're welcome to close on your amendment 1849. Senator Epke waives closing. Question before us is adoption of AM 1849 to LB 931. All those in favor, please vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Have you all voted that wish to? Please record, Mr. Clerk.
38 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on adoption of committee amendments.
AM 1849 is adopted. Going back to the queue, Senator Larson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Moorfield yield to a question?
Senator Moorfield, would you please yield?
Yes. Thank you, Senator Moorfield. Just a second. Thank you, Senator Moorfield. I've heard you on this mic before. Do you believe health care is a fundamental right?
I do.
Okay. And you're talking about that fundamental right. I've heard that it's one of those things that everybody should have access to, whether that is the health care or the prescription or anything of that nature. Specifically, I've heard you talk about Medicaid expansion in that aspect, correct?
I believe healthcare should be a right. It's not currently a right now.
But you believe it's a fundamental right?
I believe it should be a fundamental right.
Okay.
I don't think that's currently the legal status or state of it.
Okay. Would Senator Howard yield to a question?
Senator Howard, would you please yield?
Yes, I will.
Thanks, Senator Howard. And along the same lines as Senator Moorfield, do you believe health care should be access to it should be a fundamental right?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Well, colleagues, with what we just did in AM 1839 or 49, excuse me if I have the committee amendment numbers wrong, was we required an ID to be shown to access a prescription. So I will be offering AM 2115 that will read, in order to have access to the fundamental right that is health care, an individual who does not have a valid driver's license or operator's license or state identification card and needs access to a state identification card for the purposes of this section, in order to have identification available at the appropriate time, any individual who does not have a valid driver's license or operator's license or state identification card may apply to the Department of Motor Vehicles for a state identification at the time and for the any purpose which shall be issued at no cost. Colleagues, if you're going to require an ID to be shown to receive what you perceive as a fundamental right, shouldn't any individual that gets that needs that ID be given that ID at no cost? Because essentially, if they do not have an ID or they cannot afford an ID, they will be denied the ability to get a prescription. There are no provisions in the committee amendment that I saw And we do have provisions in voting law. They can vote provisionally to check an address. You aren't turned away at the polls when you don't have an ID. And any voter ID amendment that we have offered, they still wouldn't be turned down at the polls. But under the current committee amendment that was adopted to LB 931, if you do not have an ID, you won't be able to get a prescription. Will Senator Moorfield yield to a question?
Senator Moorfield, would you please yield again?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Moorfield. Do you believe that it is right that somebody that has been prescribed an opiate by a doctor but does not have access or cannot afford an ID should be denied medical assistance because they cannot afford that ID?
Actually, Senator, if you look at the language a little bit more closely, it says anyone with an ID can receive this. And so I believe that it's broad enough. And in addition, I think that comparing voting rights to...
No, I was
getting an
asking,
ID
and I'll double check the language. I believe it talked about, it really detailed out the IDs that were going to be accepted. I'll double check that. And maybe Senator Howard is looking at that as well. But my question is do we need to detail out what IDs are acceptable? What, whether it's a driver's license, a state identification card, are we just going to allow,